Have you ever felt so excited about something, it feels like your heart is literally beating out of your chest? Like your heart is skipping beats, and you feel it fluttering like there are butterflies in your chest? Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about the science behind that.
Welcome to The Science Behind That with Atticus Hamilton.
Hello, all you scientists out there, and welcome back. Before we get started today, I would like to invite all of you to go grab yourself a delicious cup of coffee just for me. Add a little bit of maple syrup in it, and join us for this beautiful Friday morning for today's episode. So, as you heard in the new intro, I might add, which I'm very proud of. As you heard in the new intro, we are going to be talking about butterflies in our chest and the feeling of our hearts racing or going a mile a minute, as other colloquial terms have described it. And you know what? This is an area that I really like because, as some of you may know, I am a medicine man, or at least I will be. Knock on wood. But I like anatomy. I love human anatomy. And so, ladies and gentlemen, before we can, get a really, really good understanding of what a palpitation is, we need to understand first. How blood enters into the heart. What is the structure of the heart? And no, there won't be a test after this. It's just so we all have a good grasp over what we're talking about today. So I'm sure all of you guys know that humans have a 4-chambered heart. Not every organism has a 4-chambered heart, actually. A lot of organisms don't, but humans do. And so on the entire right-hand side of our heart is where all of the deoxygenated blood is, and the entire left-hand side of our heart is where all the oxygenated blood is. Pretty cool, right? So in anatomy, if something is above something else, we tend to not say this is above this, right? We usually say this is superior to. So superior is above and inferior is below, okay? So in anatomy, if you're ever talking about blood flow and you're saying blood flow is descending from a superior position, you're just saying in a very fancy lingo, that's just falling down. That's all you're saying, right? Or if it's ascending inferiorly, that's just saying it's rising up below something. So deoxygenated blood from the tissues above the heart, which would include the sternum, the manubrium, the clavicle, the neck, head, shoulders, all the muscles of the upper back, everything like that, enters into the heart through what is called the superior vena cava, which deposits it right into our right atrium, which, remember, right-hand side is deoxygenated, left-hand side is oxygenated, and the heart's chambers are split up into atriums and ventricles. And then at the same time that the superior vena cava deposits that blood there, the inferior vena cava takes blood from the periphery, from the lower body periphery, so the lower body tissues, and deposits it in that right atrium as well. And that would include the legs, etc., hips, waist, genitals, everything. Deposits it in the right atrium there. From there, the right atrium is like, all right, get this blood out of here. It pumps, and it forces it through what is called the tricuspid valve, which is just to prevent the blood from flowing backwards into the right ventricle. The right ventricle then pumps the blood up through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. You guessed it. From the pulmonary artery, ladies and gentlemen, the blood moves into the lungs, where it is oxygenated and enters back into the heart through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. The left atrium then forces the blood through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle pumps the blood up through the aortic valve into the aorta. And the aorta has four outputs on it, 3 going up to the upper body, 1 going to the lower body. And there we go. We just learned human heart anatomy in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Probably a little less than that. I think like 4 minutes. Or 4.5 minutes maybe. I don't know. You guys time this and let me know how long that was. So there we go. Now we have a nice understanding of that. Time to move on to what actually is the butterflies in our chest. Simple answer is palpitations. And so what are palpitations is the question of the hour. And apparently it's a very hard question to answer. So I was curious. I learned this, I learned this not too long ago. Not really from any of my classes, just from my private or personal anatomy study. But anyway, I was curious, so I went on to Google. This is how all great stories begin. I went onto Google, and I just typed in what are palpitations, and all I got were what are the symptoms of palpitations. And then I said, what is the physiology behind palpitations? And again, I only got the symptoms of it. And this continued through what is the heart doing, to what is the pathophysiology, to what is the mechanism. And I actually wasn't getting an anatomical or physiological answer. And that is what we're talking about today. So, palpitations are, in the most loose definition possible, the perception of cardiac activity. They're often described as fluttering, racing, or skipping. Shout out to the Merck manual. So, what is actually causing them though? So, this is the interesting thing. We know what causes palpitations in the events of disease, right? But we don't know what the mechanism behind palpitations is when you're just excited to see your boyfriend or girlfriend, or when you're excited to go into a haunted house. We have no idea what the mechanism is behind those palpitations. But we do know what is going on. We don't know the cause of it, but we do know what is going on. So, typically, when our heart beats normally, there is what is called a polarization and a depolarization. Now, the polarization is, again, another fancy word for contraction. So when you polarize the cardiac muscle, the heart is contracting. And when you depolarize it, it is relaxing. That was the word I was looking for. And so ordinarily, we cannot perceive this depolarization. We cannot feel the relaxation of the heart, right? But in instances of palpitations, which are irregular heart movement, we can. And so often people say, well, it feels like it's skipping. You know, my heart's, I'm so excited to see my heart is literally skipping beats. Well, it's not skipping beats. Don't worry, you're not going to die. But it feels like it is because we're actually perceiving that refractory period or that rest period between beats of the atrium, between beats of the ventricle, right? We don't normally feel that, but for whatever reason during palpitations, we do feel that. And so then what is actually causing this, or what actually is this irregular heart movement then that's causing this perception of the relaxation of the heart? Well, most commonly they are what are called arrhythmias. And to put it simply, an arrhythmia is just abnormal cardiac activity. It could be your ventricle is beating faster. It could be your, your atrium is beating faster. Anything that is abnormal is generally an arrhythmia. And most commonly, at least for when you're excited to see somebody, for when your heart feels like it's fluttering, these arrhythmias are either PACs or PVCs. And so what are PACs? Well, PACs stand for premature atrial contractions, which just means that the atrium, you guys remember what the atriums are for, right? They receive all the incoming blood and then pump those into the ventricles. The atriums simply just beat before they're supposed to beat. So they kind of get off step a little bit. So your blood volumes change a little bit. And so, yeah. So that is a very common arrhythmia, and that is also a very common root mechanism for palpitations when you're excited, is premature atrial contractions. The other type, PVCs, stand for premature ventricular contractions, which again, you guys guessed it, y'all are scientists out there. That is just when the ventricles beat sooner than they should. And so everyone just gets a little confused. And when that happens, not only are you perceiving the premature beat of the atrium or the ventricle, but you're also perceiving the refractory period, the rest phase between the beats, right? So then that's when it feels like it's beating faster than it should, and or that the heart is skipping beats, that is fluttering. And that's it. That's generally it. Now, are you going to die from this? Absolutely not. Unfortunately, we all die. But you're not going to die because you're too excited to see whatever. PACs and PVCs do not kill people, and they are not dangerous. However, there are 4 dangerous arrhythmias that I would feel bad if I didn't talk about really quickly. The first one, it is called a paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. That is a mouthful. Or PSVT. That is a lot better. Tachycardia just means that the heart is beating faster than it should. So when the heart is beating faster than it should, we call that a tachycardia. When the heart is beating slower than it should, we call that a bradycardia. And so a paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia is just meaning that the upper portion of the ventricle near the aortic and pulmonary valves, it's just that small region, it's beating faster than it should. So one, it's not the whole ventricle that's beating faster than it should. It's just a portion of it. And then so not only are you going to get off rhythm with your heartbeat because your atrium is beating slower, but, 50% of your ventricle is beating slower than the other 50%. And that's when you have issues. And that can be dangerous. And that can be an early sign or the beginnings of a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. The other one is called an atrioventricular nodal retrant tachycardia, which is just a tachycardia between in the middle, basically, of an atrium and a ventricle. Very, very similar. Except in that instance, it's a ventricle and an atrium that are beating faster. So half the heart is beating too fast than the other half, and then that throws it off even more. And then we have atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter. Now, what is that? Because it has the word flutter in it, right? And we already said that people describe palpitations as your heart fluttering. No. Your heart, when you're excited to go see Hot Wheels the movie, no. That you're not having atrial fibrillation. I promise you that. What atrial fibrillation is it's just one entire atrium is beating way faster than it should, and it's beating out of sync. And that's the big issue there, is when it beats out of sync, because then you have major issues with blood going into the right ventricle, because not enough does, right? Your flow is off. And then, of course, ladies and gentlemen, the last one is ventricular tachycardia, All that is it's basically like atrial fibrillation just with the ventricle. The ventricle beats faster than it should, and that is probably the most dangerous out of all of these. Because when a ventricle beats faster than it should, you're not going to get enough blood, not only in the heart, but you're not going to get enough blood into the surrounding tissues, and that is cause for concern. But, ladies and gentlemen, when you're just excited to see whatever you're going to see, or whenever you're scared, or whenever it feels like your heart is skipping beats, it is either premature atrial contraction or premature ventricular contraction, which are totally harmless. And they just signify how excited we are to be doing whatever it is that we're doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you guys have a lovely Friday morning, and I hope you guys have a lovely weekend. I will see all of you guys back here on Monday, but until then, ladies and gentlemen, remember, as always, stand up and question everything.